A company forgets what made them great. They often find out the hard way. "We need hungrier talent who can meet higher targets," said Brian Whitley, as he slid a slim folder across the polished glass conference table. The man barely looked at me as he delivered the line, rehearsed, clean, corporate, but empty like a presentation slide with no data. "The company is moving in a new direction." That direction apparently did not include me. "My name is Jason Rourke. I'm 47 years old, and until that Thursday morning in March 2024, I was the senior account executive at Arcata Equity Partners, headquartered in Charlotte, North Carolina. For the last 9 years, I'd built something most companies dream of, a client portfolio that accounted for nearly 40% of our total revenue. I didn't cut corners. I didn't smooth talk my way to contracts. I flew coach when the budget said so, stayed in 2-star motels, ate airport sandwiches, and missed birthdays, anniversaries, and Little League games. What I built came from loyalty, relentless work, and trust. I glanced down at the papers, not because I needed to read them, I already knew what they said, but because it gave me a moment to steady the flood of adrenaline pushing at my ribs. I smiled, small, flat, and extended my hand to Brian. "Thank you for the opportunity," I said. My voice was calm, even appreciative, which seemed to unsettle him. He hesitated, then shook it. No one in the room, not HR, not Brian, understood the clarity that had just taken shape behind my eyes. It was like watching fog lift from a valley you didn't realize was there. And what I saw wasn't bitterness. It was precision. Brian had arrived 6 months earlier as our new vice president of sales, a move by the CEO meant to reinvigorate culture. He came with the standard toolkit, custom suits that didn't wrinkle, TEDx quotes about innovation, a LinkedIn page riddled with buzzwords like growth hacking and disruption. In 6 months, he hadn't joined a single client call with me, hadn't asked about a single contract, but had restructured our commission model 3 weeks in. That new model? It slashed my earnings by 22%, even as my clients renewed at the highest retention rate in the firm. I didn't complain. I watched. Because men like Brian think culture is in the branding. They forget that in service-based business, culture lives in the conversations after the meetings end, the late-night problem-solving, the birthday text to a client's kid, the call on a Sunday when something breaks and you're the only one they trust to fix. 2 months ago, during the office renovations, they moved my desk to the far end of the floor next to the printer. My name vanished from the agenda of leadership meetings I used to lead. Yesterday, I returned from lunch to find my computer being serviced. Small things, death by 1,000 cuts. But I'm not the type to bleed in public. So, I packed my office quiet, a photo from a retreat with the Henderson Group, the folder of client contacts I'd maintained privately, more out of habit than design. Nothing that belonged to the company, nothing they could claim. As I walked through the main lobby, Valerie from finance saw me. "Need help with that?" she asked, eyeing the box with polite confusion. "Are you switching offices?" I gave her the kind of smile you use when someone says something deeply innocent. "Something like that," I replied. "No scene, no theatrics." I didn't need them. In the elevator, I stood next to Malcolm Trent, the CEO. His nose was buried in his phone, swiping through something urgent, probably an investor dashboard. He nodded when he saw me, but didn't really see me. Which made sense. He had no idea that Brian had just pulled the linchpin from under the company's largest revenue engine. The elevator chimed. I stepped off. He stayed behind, unaware that his quarter was about to fall off a cliff. I didn't feel anger as I walked to the parking garage. What I felt was almost surgical, clean, sharp, efficient, like a scalpel through scar tissue. I wasn't shocked. I'd seen this coming months ago. What surprised me was how light I felt. Like waking from a long, comfortable dream and realizing the house you were living in wasn't yours. And never had been. The sun was setting over downtown Charlotte as I slid the box into the back seat of my car. The skyline shimmered on the hood, a mirror of the city I'd helped build in quiet, invisible ways. No call came from the office. No one ran after me. I sat behind the wheel for a moment, letting the stillness settle. Then my phone buzzed. A text. Travis Herndon. My largest client, the annual contract renewal was next Thursday. He was confirming dinner for Wednesday. He didn't know yet. None of them did. I didn't reply. I looked out the windshield toward the horizon, not at the sunset but at the shape of tomorrow. Brian hadn't just fired an employee. He'd severed the one link that connected Arcadia Equity to over $10 million, 0 cents in annual business, and he didn't even realize it yet. Loyalty is only a virtue until it becomes inconvenient. I first walked into Arcadia Equity's old office in South End, Charlotte in late 2015. Back then we were still called Whitestone Partners, a scrappy mid-tier investment group trying to prove we belonged at the grown-up table. I was 38, fresh off a 5-year stretch with Riverton Advisory, where I'd consistently hit targets but watched promotions go to executives with shinier MBAs and longer golf weekends with the board. When Stale's CEO Malcolm Trent met me for lunch at a barbecue joint on South Boulevard, he didn't pitch me a job. He pitched me a mission. "I need someone who knows this market," he said between bites of brisket. "Someone clients trust, not just someone who looks good in a PowerPoint." I joined a week later. The first few months were a whirlwind of 5 appointments, flights, handshake dinners, and spreadsheets built on midnight coffee. There were no rules, no limits, just growth targets and freedom. I took that chaos and shaped it into consistency. We didn't have a CRM system then. I built one in Excel, colored and ugly as hell, but it worked. I didn't just sign accounts. I built bridges, one conversation, one problem solved, one birthday remembered at a time. Clients like Lockwood Manufacturing and Eastern Federal Credit Union didn't just sign multi-year deals. They started calling me before they made any strategic moves. Because I listened. Because I showed up. By year 2, I had grown our regional footprint from scattered small contracts to statewide partnerships. By year 4, we were national. 3 promotions followed, none of which I asked for. The numbers made the argument for me. When we rebranded to Arcadia Equity in 2019, we were managing over $30 million, 0 cents in active contracts. Nearly $12 million, 0 cents of that came from my portfolio alone. My wife, Melissa, used to joke that I was married to the portfolio. She wasn't wrong. Thursday night dinners with the Johnsons, early flights to catch a client's kid's soccer game. I once flew to St. Louis just to deliver a document in person because the CEO's father had just passed, and I didn't trust anyone else to handle it gently. My own kids grew up used to empty bleachers at dance recitals and baseball games. "Dad's working," they'd say matter-of-factly. I kept promising it would be worth it, someday. Then Brian Whitley showed up. He was introduced during our Q3 leadership call as an injection of new vision. The man practically oozed confidence, the kind that didn't come from competence, but from curated online courses and strategic lighting in Zoom calls. In his first town hall, he used the phrase, "next-gen client acquisition matrix" without irony. I knew what that meant. He'd never sold anything that didn't come with a click-through rate. And he didn't know the first thing about our clients. People who still preferred contracts hand-signed and discussions over steak, not Slack. 3 weeks into his tenure, my executive assistant of 4 years, Rachel, was reassigned to create more team fluidity. I didn't protest, I adapted. The next month, all expense reports over $300, 0 cents needed. VP-level review. Travel requests required double sign-off. Then came the real kicker. A new commission model introduced under the guise of alignment. Mine was slashed by 22%, while newly hired reps with no portfolio were promised aggressive bonuses for new business. Brian's message was clear. Hunters. I remember that quarterly review like it happened yesterday. Brian stood at the head of the table with his polished slides pointing to a chart with a flat line. "Your client acquisition rate has plateaued, Jason," he said. "Only 2 new accounts this quarter." I leaned forward, calm. "Because I'm expanding existing relationships. Lockwood just doubled their contract. Henderson Group signed a 5-year renewal. That's retention." He didn't look up from his tablet. "The future is in new blood." The moment that should have sent warning bells, it wasn't the new comp model. It was when I was assigned to mentor a new hire, Emily Carter, 27, former SAF sales star from Austin, 0 experience in institutional equity, fresh off a stint at a tech incubator. She was smart, eager, and polite, but she didn't know our world. Yet 2 days after she joined, Brian had her shadow a call with Travis Herndon, my biggest client. No explanation, no heads up. Just give her some exposure. After that call, Travis texted me, "Who's the new girl? Are you training your replacement?" I laughed it off. She's just learning the ropes. But deep down, a knot formed in my gut. Tight. Familiar. The kind that tells you something's shifting under the surface. I started noticing little things. My name was absent from internal forecasts. Invitations to leadership summits stopped arriving. Clients I'd handled for years were being asked to provide feedback for internal mapping. I should have said something. I should have pushed back harder, but the truth? I didn't think I needed to. I believed my work would seek for itself. That belief. The Friday before my termination, I stayed late finishing Q1 projections. I was alone in the office except for the janitor and Brian's light still on upstairs. I saw him through the glass walls, talking to two men in suits. One I recognized as a rep from Verity Capital, a firm rumored to be circling Arcadia for a buyout. I didn't think much of it. I should have. What I didn't know, what none of us old-timers knew, was that the strategy wasn't to grow the company. It was to sell it. And people like me, people who were the face of $12 million, 0 cents in revenue, weren't seen as assets. We were liabilities. Too personal. Too human. Too much risk for the clean handoff investors craved. In hindsight, all the signs were there. The reassigned assistant, the shrinking autonomy, the push for younger faces. They weren't subtle. I just refused to believe that a company I had poured 9 years into would cut me loose, not because I failed, but because I succeeded too independently. I was wrong. And now they were about to find out what that independence really meant. Sometimes the cleanest break is the one that leaves the deepest scar. It happened on a Tuesday, not a dramatic Friday, not a symbolic Monday. Just a quiet, gray-skied Tuesday in March, an ordinary day carved open by something irreversible. Brian called it a re-environment meeting, the kind where the calendar invite comes without an agenda, the kind where HR is already sitting in the room when you walk in. I knew before I sat down. He didn't waste time. We're grateful for your contributions, Jason, but we're moving in a more aggressive direction. The words came out smooth, corporate, like he'd practiced in front of a mirror. His suit jacket was open. His watch was visible. A symbol, maybe. Time's up. This isn't performance-based, he added, like that made it better. We just need people who can grow faster. I didn't blink. I didn't nod. I just watched his eyes for the moment he realized I wasn't surprised. That moment came fast. He shifted, glanced at the HR manager beside him. Deborah, someone I'd known for years, who couldn't meet my gaze. Your severance package includes 90 days of pay, continuation of benefits, and a letter of reference, she said, voice brittle. We'd appreciate your cooperation with the transition. Brian leaned forward slightly. We'd like you to help onboard the new team, maybe provide some account context before you go. Possibly a consulting opportunity down the line. Consulting. The last refuge of a guilty conscience. I reached across the table, not for a handshake, not for conflict, but for the manila folder already waiting there. I opened it briefly, skimming the legal language I already understood. Then I closed it, tucked it under my arm, and stood up. Thank you, I said. I'll clear my desk now. They weren't expecting grace. They were expecting reaction. Outrage. Bargaining. Anything to justify the decision. But I gave them silence. Because silence is control. Back at my office, I packed slowly. Intentionally. One framed photo at a time. The mug my daughter gave me on Father's Day 3 years ago. The sales trophy from 2021 that still had a typo in the engraving. The folder of client notes I kept in my bottom drawer, not because I didn't trust the CRM, but because trust can't be summarized in bullet points. I didn't take anything that wasn't mine. But I also didn't leave behind what truly mattered. Relationships built outside the firewall. Loyalty that didn't belong to Arcadia Equity but to me. Over 9 years, I had become something more than an account executive. I was a constant, a voice that picked up air ranked in rooms where logos didn't. As I exited the building, shoulders straight, box in hand, people avoided eye contact, not out of malice, out of fear. Fear that they were next. Fear that my quiet dignity made their loyalty look like weakness. Only Valerie from finance managed to whisper, Jason, I'm sorry. Don't be. This was overdue. In the parking deck, I paused before unlocking my car. I set the box on the hood and looked up at the skyline. Charlotte's glass towers shimmered in the afternoon haze. I'd built a career in those towers, and in that moment I felt weightless, not untethered. The drive home was silent. No calls, no music. Just the hum of the road and the low throb of something deep inside Falany. The agony sense of finality, yes, but also clarity, like stepping into cold water and realizing you can still breathe. When I pulled into my driveway, the first thing I saw was Melissa's SUV, gone. She was still in Asheville helping her sister with the twins. The house was quiet. I walked in, set the box on the kitchen counter, and poured a glass of water. My phone buzzed. Travis Herndon. The text was short. Still good for Wednesday dinner? He didn't know. None of them did. They set the phone down, stared out the window. My backyard was still, the oak tree unmoved, the bird feeder half empty, life utterly indifferent. I thought about calling Travis, about telling him what happened, about warning him that someone from Arcadia would reach out soon, pitching continuity and fresh energy, but I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I walked upstairs to my home office, opened my laptop, logged into my private email. Then I opened a folder I hadn't touched in months. Project Foxglove, a name Melissa and I had joked about back when I started keeping personal copies of account notes and contact lists, just in case. Not because I didn't trust the company, but because I had seen too many good people get blindsided. Inside the folder were over 200 entries. Names, phone numbers, client history, preferred wine, golf handicap, spouse's name, kids' ages, anniversary dates. The things that matter when you're not just managing contracts but relationships. These weren't contacts. They were people who called me, not the front desk. As I scrolled through the list, I felt something tighten, not resentment, not vengeance. Purpose. Arcadia thought they'd deleted a name from payroll. What they'd done was sever the lifeline that tethered them to $10 million, 0 cents in predictable revenue, and they had no idea yet. Tomorrow, I would make 3 calls. Not to complain, not to recruit. Just to inform. The rest I knew would unfold on its own. I didn't set an alarm the next morning. For the first time in 9 years, I let the sun do the job my phone usually did. Melissa had texted me a photo of her niece covered in oatmeal, followed by a simple, "How are you holding up?" I replied. Clear-headed, making coffee. And I meant it. There was no tension, no panic, only a strange, calm, heartfelt, friendly voice. By 8:43 a.m. I was sitting at the kitchen island with a legal pad, my personal phone, and 3 names circled in blue ink. Travis Herndon, James Vick, and Peter Carlton. Together their accounts totaled over $3,200,000, 0 cents in annual revenue for Arcadia Equity, and each of them had a contract renewal due within 30 days. I started with Travis. He answered on the second ring, cheerful as ever. "Jason, my man. I was just about to confirm dinner for tomorrow night." I paused. "Travis, as of yesterday, I'm no longer with Arcadia." The silence that followed was immediate and dense. "What?" he asked. "What happened?" I kept it clean. They're shifting directions. Brian decided I'm not aggressive enough for his new sales model. "Brian, the cufflink guy?" "You're kidding me," he said, voice flattening. "So who's taking over our account?" I told him it would likely be either Brian or Emily Carter, the new junior rep who'd shadowed one of our last meetings. "The one who called our CIO sir 5 times, he said, then sighed. I offered no pitch, no suggestion, just information. "I just thought you should hear it from me directly," I said. He was quiet for a beat. Then, "Wherever you go, Jason, that's where we go, period." I thanked him and moved to the next. James Vick from Henderson Group had always been blunt, practical, and loyal. When I told him, his tone darkened. "They let you go in Q1? That's like benching your quarterback in the red zone." He didn't ask for reasons or names, just said, "Come to my office Monday. We'll talk." The third call, Peter Carlton, was shorter. Navy veteran, no small talk. When I delivered the news, he simply said, "Understood. Call me when you land somewhere solid." That was it. No persuasion, no sales pitch. Just 3 calls that moved silently but decisively, like the opening moves of a chess game. And by noon, the board had shifted. My phone started buzzing when I wanted to talk. Word was already moving through the industry. At 1:09 p.m., Arcadia's legal team sent me a form email reminding me of confidentiality and obligations regarding proprietary information. I didn't even open the attachment. At 2:41 p.m., Everett Trent, the CEO, called. I let it go to voicemail. "Jason," he said, sounding anxious. "We're getting noise from key clients. Let's talk about your transition." Maybe we can structure a consulting arrangement. At 3:03 p.m., Travis texted me. They called. Brian and the new girl tried to sell me on continuity, offered 10% discount. I asked one question. Who knows our business? They couldn't answer. I sent the termination. Vic and Carlton too, you okay? I replied crystal clear. By the end of the business day, 8 clients had sent Arcadia their notices. I hadn't asked. I hadn't pushed. Trust does its own heavy lifting when it's been earned. At 4:13 p.m. I met with Lawrence Finch, an employment lawyer I'd helped years ago. After reviewing the papers, he leaned back and said, "You're clean. They can try to intimidate you, but they have nothing." Then at 5:12 p.m. Brian Whitley himself texted me, "Let's discuss exit options. Stock, maybe a consulting path. We could use help transition." I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. I poured a glass of bourbon and watched the light shift across my backyard, not in celebration, just to mark the moment. The weight wasn't anger, it was purpose. They hadn't just let go of an employee, they'd untethered themselves from the relationships that carried their revenue. Arcadia thought they could erase trust from a payroll sheet. What they didn't understand was this: you can't fire loyalty, you can only forfeit it. The greatest betrayals don't come from enemies, they come wrapped in the language of strategy. 3 days after I walked out of Arcadia, the calls started. Not from lawyers or board members, but from people who had once worked quietly behind the scenes. Julia Whitmore, my former assistant who now handled executive scheduling for the CEO. I sat in the corner office of Grantley & Company, still technically a visitor, the ink on my preliminary agreement not yet dry. "What do you mean?" I asked. She paused. They were planning to sell the company. Veriton Holdings made an offer 2 months ago, one of those strategic buyouts. But they had conditions. They wanted full control of all major accounts with in-house reps, no in-house reps, no risk that a relationship walks out the door. I felt my chest tighten, not in shock but in confirmation, like hearing the diagnosis you already suspected. I'd been removed not for failing, but because I succeeded too well. My connections were too strong, too personal. I was the variable they couldn't control, the X factor in a spreadsheet that refused to be reduced to data. And so, I was eliminated. Julia continued. They started bringing in Veriton people 2 months ago, under the title of strategic consultants. You weren't the only one they were watching. That night, I sat at my desk and made a call not to a client, but to Travis Herndon. "I need to ask you something," I said. "Did anyone from Arcadia try to introduce you to consultant recently? Maybe someone from another firm?" He didn't even hesitate. "Yeah, a guy named Thomas. Said he was advising Arcadia on growth potential. Asked a lot of questions about our long-term goals, our willingness to consider cross-portfolio solutions." I didn't love it but figured it was harmless. It wasn't. And Travis knew that now. "So that's what this was," he muttered. "They were soft transferring us, trying to turn clients into assets, not relationships." One by one, I made more calls. Quiet, precise conversations. No accusations. Just one question. "Have you met someone named Thomas or Marcus or anyone claiming to be a strategic advisor?" By 9 p.m., a 41-year-old McCounts had been approached under the same pretense. My name hadn't been mentioned, but my absence had. It was a slow detachment, a surgical rebranding of relationships, as if wiping fingerprints off glass and pretending no one ever touched it. I finally texted Everett Trent, the CEO. "No meeting necessary, I understand the Veriton situation completely." His reply came within minutes. "It was a business decision, Jason, nothing personal." But it was personal. It always is when people reduce your life's work to a line item. When 9 years of dinners, red eyes, hospital visits, last-minute problem-solving, and weekend calls get labeled risk exposure. What they forgot, what Veriton never understood, is that trust doesn't exist in a database. It lives in the cracks of uncertainty, the way people remember who showed up when things went sideways. By the next morning, 3 more former clients had signed with Grantley & Company. I didn't ask them to. They followed because the ground under Arcadia was crumbling, and they recognized the stability in the familiar voice that had always picked up the phone. Grantley moved fast. They gave me resources I hadn't dared dream of. Analysts, marketing support, and most importantly, equity. Real ownership, not stock options, not phantom shares, but a literal seat at the table. The contrast was jarring. One company treated me like a threat, The other treated me like a foundation. 2 weeks after the fallout, Arcadia's deal with Verity collapsed. Julia texted me a screenshot of an internal memo. Client retention risk deemed too high. Acquisition terminated. The subject line? You Argent. Reevaluate strategic direction. I smiled, not out of revenge, but out of clarity. You see, they thought they were buying a company. What they failed to grasp was that the value was never the brand. It was the people the clients trusted, and those people had already walked out the door. Success is the only closure some betrayals deserve. 6 weeks after I walked out of Arcadia, I stood at the head of Grantley & Company's largest conference room. Behind me, on a single slide, was a number. $8,400,000, 0 cents in new business. 70% of it from clients who had followed me without hesitation. The room was full of analysts, partners, division heads. At the end of the table, Michael Grantley himself raised a glass and said, "To the best acquisition we've ever made, and we didn't even have to buy a company to do it." There was polite laughter, soft and professional, but I didn't join in. This wasn't about celebration. This was about something deeper. Validation. Quiet, permanent, earned. My phone buzzed with a news alert. Arcadia's stock had fallen another 8%. Unscripted. The CEO, Everett Trent, was stepping down amid strategic turbulence. Brian Whitley had already pursued other opportunities 2 weeks prior. Their board had issued a restructuring statement laced with vague optimism and the scent of desperation. Later that afternoon, I received an email from Emily Carter. "Hi, Jason. I've been let go along with most of the sales team. I know things were messy. If Grantley is hiring, I'd be grateful for a chance." I forwarded it to HR with a single line. Worth a conversation, she wasn't the problem. An hour later, as I was about to leave the office, my assistant handed me a courier envelope. Inside was a handwritten note from Everett. "You were right. I mistook relationship equity for company equity. Cost us everything. If you ever have time for coffee, I'd like to apologize in person." I folded the note and placed it in my jacket pocket. Maybe someday. But not yet. That evening, driving home past Arcadia's downtown building, I noticed the sign was being taken down. The Business Journal had reported they were downsizing, moving operations to a smaller space outside the city, quietly ending the illusion of control they once thought they held. I didn't stop. Didn't take a photo, just kept driving. A year to the day after Brian slid those termination papers across the table, I signed a partnership agreement making me an equity partner at Grantley & Company. My client portfolio had grown to nearly $20 million, 0 cents in annual revenue. That morning, I approved the hiring of 3 new account managers. No one would build something here only to have it stripped away. That was my first act as partner. When Melissa came by with coffee, she looked at the signed documents, then at me. "You don't look as happy as I expected," I smiled. "Just thinking. Not about Arcadia, about here. About doing it right this time." Before she left, she handed me a frame she'd given me last Christmas, something I'd kept on my shelf but never really read aloud. A simple quote on parchment paper: "The best revenge is massive success." After she left, I placed it face down on the credenza. Not because it wasn't true, but because that chapter was closed. The story had been told, and now I was writing something new on my own terms, in my own way. No noise, no headlines. Just proof, plain and simple, that some victories don't need applause. They just need to last.